Today, I'm going to share 3 unbelievable stories of truly bizarre places where people have been found. Each story gets progressively worse, but I guarantee that your heart will absolutely break after hearing the 3rd one. Let's dive right into them. A highly unusual case that you probably haven't heard of comes from 2017. It was the 10th of May, and an 89-year-old man named Robert Dreyer was about to celebrate his birthday. Robert, who lived in Florida, would usually get together with a couple of his friends or headed over to his family. And this year, he decided to have a nice lunch with one of his lifelong friends. And so Robert grabbed his keys to his Mercedes and headed outside, ready for the day. He reversed from his driveway and soon enough was passing through the neighborhood where he lived for most of his life. But about halfway through his journey, Robert lost control of his car for a bit, which led him to veer off the road and crash into a fire hydrant. Shaken, Robert was unsure of what had actually happened, but he decided to step outside of the car and go investigate to see what damage had been done to his car. Little did he know that right there was probably the worst decision of his life. As soon as Robert stepped out of his Mercedes, he realized that he was in a lot of trouble. There was water everywhere around and underneath the car, but that was not the worst of things. When the fire hydrant was knocked over, a sinkhole was created under Robert's car. Water began pouring out everywhere, but also the actual water pressure was now extremely strong. And as soon as Robert stepped outside of his car, it managed to sweep him underneath the Mercedes, and it sucked Robert right into the 5 feet wide hole. This accident was actually witnessed by a good few people around who managed to quickly call the ambulance and the police. One of the bystanders, a man named Edward Cunningham, tried rescuing Robert. But as much as he was trying, Edward just wasn't able to get to Robert close enough because the water was gushing too strongly, and so it was pushing Edward out of the hole. To Edward, this was pure mind-blowing because he weighed 220 pounds, and so in theory, he should have been able to get to Robert and pull him out. After some time of serious struggle, Robert managed to be taken out of the sinkhole and was immediately rushed into the hospital. Sadly, Robert would not manage to survive and was pronounced dead after he reached the hospital. If you are like me and you also don't like snakes, then this story will really stay with you for a long time as well. In June of 2024, a 45-year-old woman named Farida decided to go to the local market to pick up a few odds and ends for the family dinner she was about to make later that evening. Farida was a mother of 4 and lived in a village of Kalampang, located in the Sulawesi province in Indonesia. The market was very near her house, and Farida had gone there all the time, so her husband, called Noni, did not protest when she said that she was going to go there alone. But a few hours went by and Farida was still not coming home. So Noni, who was now very suspicious of this strange situation, decided to go out himself and start looking for her. He soon became horrified and extremely worried, as not too far away from their home in the forest, he found his wife's shoes and her bag. So in a bit of panic, he ran back to his village and started rounding up a few neighbors who could help him cover more ground. But the night was upon them, and so they couldn't really see anything around them, and so they agreed to go out first thing in the morning. The following morning, several men began combing through the forest and yelling for Farida, but nobody was answering. Just after a few minutes of searching through the forest, Noni saw that there was something slowly moving around in the leaves. And so he went to the direction of where he saw the movement, but he didn't have to go far to see what the thing was. Trying to slowly slither away was a giant 6-meter-long reticulated python. But this was not the most shocking discovery. The thing that Noni was actually looking at was the snake's weirdly large belly. And to Farida's husband, that could have meant only one thing. He quickly shouted at the man to come and help him catch the snake, which was trying to attack the man as they were approaching it. Eventually, the man overpowered it, and with his machete, Noni managed to kill the snake. He then proceeded to make cuts along the bulging belly, but when he did, he was immediately plunged into a state of horror. As the snakes inside became visible, suddenly everyone around him became aware of what was hiding within it. It was the missing woman, Farida. It is believed that as Farida was walking towards the market, she decided to take a shortcut through the forest. That is when the snake snuck up on her and sank its teeth into her leg. It then started to wrap its body around Farida, suffocating and strangling her. Then, starting with her head, the snake swallowed Farida's entire corpse. As upsetting as this was, the men worked quickly and soon managed to get Farida's body out of the python. They then covered the corpse in blankets and transported her back into the village. The whole community was left shocked as Farida's body was being carried right past them. Now, you've got to remember that these villages tend to be really tight-knit. So losing someone, especially in such horrible and gruesome way, would be a massive loss to everyone. While such snake attacks are rare, they do happen, and Farida's case was actually the 5th recorded since 2017. The first ever recorded human eaten by a reticulated python was that of the farmer from Sulawesi as well, Akbar Salubiro. Salubiro went missing in March 2017, only to be found a day later dead in the belly of a snake. This case was really well documented at the time, and there are many images and even a video from the local witnesses that have since flooded the net. Reticulated pythons are considered the longest of snakes, with the largest found being 10 meters long. So far, we know of 9 cases where pythons have eaten people, but I think there have been probably many more than that. These snakes usually eat mammals and occasionally birds, but obviously the larger the snake gets, the larger the prey would be as well. And just like in Farida's case, pythons are ambush predators, which literally means that they will wait for you to get closer before they strike and strangle you to death. So next time you visit South and Southeast Asia, I will be very careful of where you step. I'm certain that this story will really make your heart sink, because the reality is that it did not need to have a tragic ending at all. Back on 10th of April 2018, a 16-year-old high school student named Plush was headed to his tennis practice. Kyle, who was described as always happy, hardworking and vibrant, was excelling at his studies at the Seven Hills School located in Cincinnati. And even though Kyle was doing really well at practically everything he touched, Kyle especially loved being active. You see, Kyle did not really have the easiest start to his life. When he was just 4 months old, he suffered a spinal cord injury. Usually this leads to a very painful life with limited mobility, but Kyle's parents never really gave up on their son. And so, through a lot of love, support and therapy, not only was Kyle able to walk again, but he also started running, and as the years went by, Kyle was practically involved in all sports activities he could. He skied, he biked, he played soccer, and he was even on the school swimming and tennis teams. He was really what others would call a medical miracle. And so on that day, Kyle had yet another tennis practice for his upcoming tournament, and he was really excited about it. But as Kyle was heading in, he just realized that he had actually forgotten his gear behind in the car. So, now a little annoyed, Kyle turned around and sprinted across the busy sophomore parking lot to his gold Honda Odyssey. This car is a type of a minivan with 3 rows of seats and a small compartment at the back of the car for luggage. When Kyle got to his car, he got into the front row and then that's where he dropped his backpack off. He then climbed over onto the second and the third row of seats. As his gear was actually all the way back behind the 3rd row, Kyle had to lean over the seat bench to get to it. But that is exactly what he should not have done. What Kyle did not know was the fact that the bench seat was actually not locked in. And this was because of a small mistake. The spare tire was sandwiched between the 2nd and 3rd row of the seats. And so it was preventing the bench from clicking in, safely locking it into its place. And as soon as Kyle put all of his weight onto the seat, it flipped against the back window, pinning and trapping Kyle with his head down. His arms got stuck alongside his body and trapped against the window, with his hands stuck firmly against the edge of the seat, so Kyle had no way of using them to free himself. The seat, weighing 80 pounds, was fully slammed into his chest, so it was extremely hard for Kyle to breathe. Kyle was only 5 foot 2 inches tall and weighed 127 pounds, so the seat was a massive force he had to be dealing with. Not only that, but also due to the angle he was pinned down at, his weight was contributing to what was pushing the seat further down onto Kyle's chest. With only his legs free, Kyle tried kicking and dragging his feet against the window to prop himself back up, or at least free one of his arms, but nothing was really working. The boy knew that he had to get to his phone and call 911, but with his hands trapped, he quickly thought of using his iPhone's voice recognition, Siri, instead. At 3:14 p.m., Kyle asked Siri to call 911, which did connect her to a dispatcher. But Kyle had actually no way of knowing that because he could not see or hear his phone. And so he just continued on to talk, not really responding to the dispatcher's questions. And here is the actual recording.
Hello, Cincinnati 911. What is the address of your emergency?
Help! Help!
Cincinnati 911.
I'm stuck in my van outside the Seven Hills Wholesale parking lot.
The Seven Hills what parking lot?
Help! I need help.
Where are you?
Hey Siri.
Hello?
Hang on.
Hello?
Help! Help! Help!
Where are you? Hello? Where are you?
I can't hear you. I'm in desperate need of help.
What is the address? Hello?
I'm gonna die here.
Where are you?
Help!
As you could hear, this call that lasted 3 long agonizing minutes got eventually disconnected. Kyle was still not managing to get any more room for himself, and so he was still having a really hard time breathing. And so to Kyle it was becoming obvious that he was in a life-death scenario, and that if the police did not find him soon, his life was in serious danger. Back at the station, 2 officers got dispatched to an unknown trouble run. They arrived at the parking lot at 3:26 p.m, but they had actually a hard time locating the car since the dispatcher was unable to hear Kyle when he was describing his car. And the dispatcher also didn't share any details about the fact that the boy was screaming and kicking for help, or even anything of him saying that he actually might die soon. As for the dispatcher, she thought that the caller might have been an older woman stuck in a car in the main parking lot of the school, which of course would have been the wrong place. The dispatcher also didn't start entering any of these details into the CAT system for the police to have immediate access to. She also failed to identify the situation as a rescue attempt. And it would be 7 long minutes before any of this information was actually passed over to the force. She actually tried calling the number back, but got to Kyle's voicemail instead, and so she thought that it could have actually been a prank call. Hence, she decided to dispatch the officers on an unknown trouble run instead. All of these were really big mistakes, and they would cause Kyle to remain in his terrible situation, not knowing whether help was coming or not. What was even worse was the fact that Kyle's car was backed into the parking space, so his trunk was actually facing away from the parking lot, which was surrounded by trees and not even other cars. So, unless the officers knew which car to go to, there was just no sign that the boy was trapped against the back window at all. And Kyle knew that. But at the same time, he was not aware that the police had arrived on the scene, as they never rang the sirens. And sadly, the officers never got anywhere near the car for Kyle to know that they were there. They thought that they were looking for an old woman stuck inside of her car, not a boy propped against the window. So the officers remained in their car, eating lunch and listening to music as they drove around the parking lot for 11 minutes. And then, when there was no sign of a trapped person anywhere, they just left. Here is a snippet of the officers closing the call at 3:37 p.m, and you can even hear them still listening to the music in the background.
I don't imagine I would.
At 3:35 p.m, Kyle was able to make another call to a different dispatcher. The boy was now really exhausted, because with every word, his chest was getting more and more compressed by the seat, meaning Kyle had less and less room for breathing. This would have had a severe impact on his oxygen levels, meaning his brain was not really getting enough, and he was in the risk of passing out soon. On the second call, Kyle again managed to say where he was and what car he was trapped in, but he also added that he knew that if he's not found soon, he might die. Here is a short recording of that second call.
Cincinnati 911, what is the address for your emergency?
Help me.
Anyone there?
I can't hear what you're saying. I probably don't have much time left to tell my mom that I love her if I die. This is not a joke. This is not a joke. I'm trapped inside my gold Honda Odyssey van in the Southwood parking lot of Seven Hills Theft. Send officers immediately. I'm almost dead. Can you hear me? Hey Siri. Hey Siri.
To anyone listening to this, it's very obvious that this boy was in great danger. But the second dispatcher was again of very little help. She never played the call back, and so completely missed the description of the car alongside Kyle saying that he didn't have much time left, so to tell his mom he loved her. She also used the talk to you function, which, designed for deaf callers, not only reduces the volume of the callers by a huge amount, but it also silences the call taker. And so even if there was a small chance that Kyle could have heard the dispatcher and actually have a conversation with her, by her using this function, all of this chance was erased. And so the dispatcher just sat back and did absolutely nothing. She never entered the details of the second call into the system as it was frozen at the time. She never notified the patrol that the caller had called again. She simply did nothing, and so nobody was even aware that Kyle was still suffering. She just hung up after having him on the line for 3 minutes. And because Kyle yet again could not hear anything back, he just had to put his fate into the hands of the police and hope that they were on their way to rescue him and that his nightmare would be soon over. But unfortunately, the exact opposite ended up happening. At 3:44 p.m, a traffic officer got a notification through his system indicating that there has been a phase 2 note. And because he didn't really know what this meant, he ended up calling the dispatch, who explained that there has been an update with relatively precise GPS coordinates. But again, she did not share this location with the officer. And the officer? He never bothered to ask what this notification might have been in relation to. And so, after ending the call, he just left the campus. And it would turn out that the GPS location pin was actually only a few cars away from where Kyle had been. And so there was a strong possibility that if anyone actually bothered to do their job properly, they would have found Kyle just in time. From Kyle's phone records, after he called 911, he also tried contacting several members of his family, but sadly none of those calls connected. Kyle's attempts to call for help stopped at 3:43 p.m. By 7 p.m. that evening, Kyle's parents began to worry about their son because he still had not come home from his practice. By 8 p.m., Kyle's parents were beside themselves. They just learned that Kyle had never attended his tennis practice. Locating his phone using Live 360, they were quickly able to see that it must have been left behind in his car in the parking lot. And so Kyle's father started up his own car and sped towards the school immediately. At 8:54 p.m, Kyle's father arrived at the Seven Hills school parking lot, and immediately he had this sinking feeling that something was horribly wrong. He could see his son's van now standing in the empty parking lot. And all of a sudden, Kyle's father thought that Kyle must have been kidnapped, otherwise why would his car and his phone be left behind like that? But as soon as he looked inside of his son's car, he spotted the backpack and the tennis racket lying on the front seat. But when he looked towards the back of the car, he could not believe his own eyes. Still hanging with his head upside down and pinned by the back row seat was Kyle. And he was not moving. Kyle's father ran to get help from one of the school staff members, and when they managed to dislodge Kyle's body and attempted CPR, they realized that they were too late. Kyle had already passed away. Another 911 call was placed and first responders arrived at 8:59 p.m, but by that point nobody was able to help Kyle any longer. At that stage, the dispatch began to piece the whole afternoon together, and they finally got a clear picture of what had actually happened. Kyle's family ended up filing a lawsuit against the city and were eventually awarded a $6 million settlement. But most amazingly, it was ruled that nobody was actually at fault over what had happened to Kyle. Not the officers, nor the dispatchers, even though there was so much evidence to say that both calls were grossly mishandled. Even though his friends and family remain heartbroken about the sudden and unexpected loss of their child, Kyle continues to be remembered as a young man who was always kind to others, always happy and clever, and as someone who enjoyed making others laugh. Kyle's parents founded a trust called Kyle Plush Answer the Call Foundation to promote the best practices in the 911 industry, hoping that unnecessary tragedies like Kyle's can be prevented from happening again. What is particularly interesting is that about 2 months prior to Kyle's death, the boy enrolled in a programming club hackathon competition and came up with the idea of a clever modification to the Apple Watch, which would help save people's lives if they became trapped in natural disasters or other places they could not get themselves out of. This modification would send a distress signal and pinpoint a location to the first responders, as well as track the person's vital signals, so that the first responders could see who was in the most immediate danger and prioritize their rescue efforts. A hardware tech startup were working on a similar solution themselves at the time. In a collaboration with Apple, they ended up developing Rapid SOS, which is free for 911, allowing the centers to locate wireless 911 callers. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, please let me know which story moved you the most. And before I release another brand new episode, here is another video that I know you'll find highly interesting as well in the meantime. Until next time.